Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents If They Come in the Morning, Voices of Resistance, edited by Angela Davis, narrated by David Sadzin and Janina Edwards. Some of us, white and black, know how great a price has already been paid to bring into existence a new consciousness, a new people, an unprecedented nation. If we know and do nothing, we are worse than the murderers hired in our name. If we know, then we must fight for your life as though it were our own, which it is, and render impassable with our bodies the corridor to the gas chamber. For if they take you in the morning, they will be coming for us that night. James Baldwin, from An Open Letter to My Sister, Angela Y. Davis. Forward. Writing of another political trial, his own, in 1951, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois said, "What turns me cold in all this experience is the certainty that thousands of innocent victims are in jail today because they had neither money, experience, nor friends to help them. The eyes of the world were on our trial despite the desperate effort of the press and radio to suppress the facts and cloud the real issues. The courage and money of friends and of strangers who dared stand for a principle freed me. But God only knows how many who were as innocent as I and my colleagues are today in hell. They daily stagger out of prison doors, embittered, vengeful, hopeless, ruined. And of this army of the wronged, the proportion of Negroes is frightful. We protect and defend sensational cases where Negroes are involved, but the great mass of arrested or accused black folk have no defense. There is desperate need to oppose this national racket of railroading to jails and chain gangs the poor, friendless, and black." Dr. Du Bois' 1951 observations are twice as true 20 years later. The practice of charging and imprisoning the helpless and the friendless goes on. The army of the wronged has increased its ranks. Angela Davis, Ruchell Magee, and the Soledad brothers are presently its most notable legionnaires. If They Come in the Morning reiterates Dr. Du Bois' point that the celebrated and famous receive our attention, the non-entities and the nameless pass on by. This collection of essays, letters, poetry, and articles firmly roots Angela Davis, Ruchell Magee, and the three Soledad brothers — they have become two through George Jackson's murder as I write — in the progressive forces of our time. There is a link from Du Bois to her. A chain exists between Magee, Drumgo, and Clichette and the dark army of the wronged that has marched from the loins of black America for the past 352 years. But these names, so familiar to us all, are but the tip of an iceberg, a crag of black, blue-hard coldness so massive it could sink America. It will not suffice to have this collection read and approved. It will not suffice even to mouth slogan and rhetoric. Even Richard Nixon now says, "Power to the people." What is wanted for the subjects of this book, and for the army of the wronged, not mentioned in these pages, is concerted and organized action. They come from a proud people whose history of struggle against domestic colonialism here is well known. Our dangers lie in our unwillingness to close ranks around the known and the unknown, and our dangerous tendencies to forget when single battles are won. Where is the Defense Committee for Donald Stone, for young Ben Cheney, for Roosevelt Jackson Jones? Where are the millions to march for freedom for those who may never march, except in lockstep, again? They could come from the readers of this book. Read it, and remember, and learn, and act. Julian Bond, September 1971.
Preface. Political repression in the United States has reached monstrous proportions. Black and brown peoples especially, victims of the most vicious and calculated forms of class, national, and racial oppression, bear the brunt of this repression. Literally tens of thousands of innocent men and women, the overwhelming majority of them poor, fill the jails and prisons. Hundreds of thousands more, including the most presumably respectable groups and individuals, are subject to police, FBI, and military intelligence surveillance. The Nixon administration most recently responded to the massive protests against the war in Indochina by arresting more than 13,000 people and placing them in stadiums converted into detention centers. It seems to us that the most important fact to be considered in the midst of this repression is that, together with its attendant paraphernalia for coercion, manipulation, and control, it reflects serious infirmities in the present social order. That is, while we do not underestimate the coercive resources available to the state, especially the police and military forces, for the suppression of all forms of opposition and the centralization of control over those forces, we think that the necessity to resort to such repression is reflective of profound social crisis, of systemic disintegration. A central conclusion we have reached in preparing this book, in fact, is that the entire apparatus of the bourgeois democratic state, especially its judicial system and its prisons, is disintegrating. The judicial and prison systems are to be increasingly defined as instruments for unbridled repression, institutions which may be successfully resisted, but which are more and more impervious to meaningful reform. Rather, they must be transformed in the revolutionary sense. Repression is the response of an increasingly desperate imperialist ruling clique to contain an otherwise uncontrollable and growing popular disaffection, leading ultimately, we think, to the revolutionary transformation of society. At such a moment, when the ruling circles must rely consistently on coercion rather than on a popularly established legitimacy to govern, it is of paramount importance that the revolutionary and radical democratic movements maintain an offensive posture and assume the dimensions of a mass movement whose growth is geometric. It is precisely because of its offensive thrust that the struggle to free political prisoners assumes such a particular significance, for it further impugns the legitimacy of the state at a critical juncture and simultaneously can return scores of brothers and sisters to their communities and the ongoing struggle. Coupled with an exposure of the prison system as an appendage of the capitalist state, as an instrument for class, racial, and national oppression, and the demand for the abolition of that system in its present form, the offensive thrust of the movement is still further enhanced. We believe that it is for all of these reasons that Angela's arrest is directly attributable to her tireless commitment to the defense of the Soledad brothers and other political prisoners, and her efforts to expose the prison system. She incurs the special wrath of the ruling circles as a black woman, a radical intellectual, and a communist. Many people in the progressive and radical movements have tended, especially in recent months, as the repression has become particularly intense, to view this intensity as a measure of the fascist nature of the government. That increasingly drastic political reprisals and increasingly open terror reveal fascist trends at the heart of ruling circles cannot be denied. The gravity of these trends must never be underestimated. As Marxists, however, we view fascism not only in terms of the terrorist methods to which it has recourse, for these may be present before the fascist arrangement is consolidated. Fascism represents the triumph of the counter-revolution. That is, fascism is the preventive counter-revolution to the socialist transformation of society. With the advent of fascism, the exploitation of the working class is infinitely more intense and buttressed by extreme forms of terrorist suppression. For this reason, it is essential to view fascist tendencies in terms of their specific challenge to working people. And in the United States, their specific challenge in the first place to the most exploited and at the same time most radical and politically conscious section of the working class, the Black, Puerto Rican, and Chicano communities. Therefore, and we have tried to emphasize this throughout, the pivotal struggle to be waged among working people is the open, aggressive, uncompromising battle against all manifestations of racism. Further, our view of the dimensions of repression must be developed in order to see the Nixon administration's attack on the collective bargaining rights of the workers through, for example, its suspension of the Bacon-Davis Act as an overt threat to the construction workers to sign a contract or else, as an essential aspect of the fascistic thrust. So also is the administration's emergency legislation to crush the railroad workers' strike, or its use of the National Guard to deal with the postal workers' strike, where the most militant rank-and-file leadership was provided by Black workers. It seems clear, certainly on the basis of historical evidence, that the advent of fascism is not a single event, a sudden coup d'etat, but rather a protracted social process. The maturation of fascist tendencies is a correlative of the maturation of the revolutionary process, both arising out of the acute and general crisis of the social order. The fascist thrust must be resisted in its incipient stages by the broadest possible coalition before it has an opportunity to consolidate its power, and the democratic radical essence of the anti-fascist movement is likewise the prerequisite for the success of the revolutionary movement. Georgy Dimitrov, of the 7th Congress of the Communist International, 1935, while addressing himself to the rise of fascism in a particular historical period, nevertheless issued a warning that strikes us as remaining valid for our own time. The revolutionary proletariat must not allow fascism to take it unawares. It must not surrender the initiative to fascism, but must inflict decisive blows on it before it can gather forces. It must not allow fascism to consolidate its position. It must repel fascism wherever and whenever it rears its head. It must not allow fascism to gain new positions. The government's repression today has been met with substantial popular resistance, both spontaneous and organized. The revolt at San Rafael, from which the charges against Angela stem, must be seen as a response to the unrestrained brutality and the most severe forms of political repression in prisons. Even greater numbers of people are beginning to involve themselves in organized mass forms of struggle. Tangible, though still partial victories have been won through the successful combination of legal and political strategies, which seek to utilize all existing constitutional channels and to create new ones, while simultaneously seeking to gain the widest possible support in the community. The stunning dismissal of murder and conspiracy charges against leaders of the Black Panther Party, Erica Huggins and Bobby Seale, by a Superior Court judge in New Haven, Connecticut, after their trial ended in a hung jury, is illustrative of the kind of legal and political struggle which can be waged. Likewise, the acquittal of the Panther 21 in New York and the reversal of the conviction of Black Panther Party Minister of Defense, Huey P. Newton, though only a partial victory because he now faces a second trial on the same charges, are indicative of the extent of the popular resistance. We do not believe, however, that these victories reflect judicial fairness or impartiality, as the New York Times confidently asserted in an editorial following the acquittal of the Panther 21. On the contrary, the victories came in spite of the incredible obstacles placed in front of the defense. These obstacles, including in many instances the psychological and physical abuse of the defendants and their attorneys, are directly attributable to the promotion of racist hysteria, anti-communism and jingoism, and the frightful erosion of constitutional rights and provisions, inspired in particular by the President of the United States, his Vice President, the Attorney General, and the Director of the FBI. These actions have turned seemingly ordinary, innocuous judicial proceedings and administrative hearings into political tribunals. The courtroom victories thus far are the result of uncompromising and relentless resistance, one which succeeded in altering the political consciousness of the jurors in particular and the communities in general, one which politically, organizationally, and legally at every point and opportunity sought to counter the calculated assault of the government. In spite of these achievements, the main repressive thrust continues. Arrests and prosecutions of political activists are much in evidence. Officially sanctioned attacks against the organized trade union movement grow more intense. The United States continues its aggression in Indochina. The officially directed assaults against the educational system, the colleges and universities in particular, continue. Police violence in the ghettos and barrios is, if anything, escalating. Still, in the midst of such a severe repression, the acquittals and dismissals demonstrate that the popular resistance has succeeded in creating a political context counterposed to the government's hysteria. This was demonstrated in the case of Bobby Seale and Erica Huggins, and in the recent dismissal of murder charges against 3 Soledad prisoners, James Wagner, Roosevelt Williams, and Jesse Lee Phillips, who were accused of killing a white prison guard at Soledad. Their attorney explained that the prosecution's case just fell apart at the seams. It was a fabrication from the beginning. It was a result of the need of the prison authorities to get a conviction. A critical aspect of this movement to free political prisoners is seen not only in its ability to free the individual victims of the repression, even more due to its relationship to the liberation movements and the revolutionary and democratic movements. The political ramifications of each victory transcend its immediate objective to free specific individuals. This dynamic is illustrated to some degree by the partial victories won in the 1930s during the struggle to free the Scottsboro Boys. 9 black youths were arrested in Jackson County, Alabama in March 1931 and charged with the rape of 2 white girls. Their innocence was incontestable, and a worldwide campaign was conducted to save their lives. Upon conviction, they had been sentenced to die in the electric chair, and ultimately to secure their freedom. This mass movement to free the Scottsboro Boys initiated a series of reforms in criminal procedures which persisted for some 20 years. The 2 most important cases were Norris v. Alabama, 1935, and Powell v. Alabama, 1939. In the first case, the United States Supreme Court ordered new trials for defendants Haywood Patterson and Clarence Norris on grounds that blacks had for years been barred from jury duty in Jackson and Morgan counties, Alabama, where the Scottsboro trials occurred, and the exclusion constituted a violation of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Powell v. Alabama, involving Ozzie Powell, another of the Scottsboro defendants, established the principle that, in a capital prosecution, the state must provide the indigent defendant with counsel. Today, 40 years later, when the crisis facing the U.S. social order is even more profound and the revolutionary and national liberation movements in the United States and the world are infinitely more powerful, it is clear that the political dynamics of the movement to free political prisoners can far exceed its previous impact. It is in this light especially that we may view Angela's defense as a pivotal case with political implications which transcend the liberation of a single individual. We believe that the most pressing political necessity is the consolidation of a united front, joining together all sections of the revolutionary, radical, and democratic movements. Only a united front, led in the first place by the national liberation movements and the working people, can decisively counter, theoretically, ideologically, and practically, the increasingly fascistic and genocidal posture of the present ruling clique. We believe that there is already evidence that such a front is emerging. Black, Puerto Rican, and Chicano communities are responding with ever greater force to official repression. Large sections of the peace movement and some significant sections of the labor movement have embraced the struggle to free political prisoners. And in the San Francisco Bay Area, efforts have been made to launch a political prisoner solidarity committee. Many organizations, including the Communist Party, have recognized the need for and consciously projected the formation of such a united front. The repression cuts across ideological boundaries. To succeed, the resistance must do likewise. We must seek a unity of action, even as we maintain our organizational identities and agree to disagree on particular issues. In this spirit, we have included a variety of political perspectives in the selections presented here, while at the same time seeking to preserve a thematic unity of resistance to racial and national oppression, to the war in Indochina, to repression, and to the prison system as it is presently constituted. In that spirit, we have also tried to expose the contrivance of the government's charges against Angela and to convey the breadth of support her defense has already achieved. Finally, it is our hope that this book will contribute in some way toward the crystallization of a united front by helping to expose the bestiality of the prison system, and by establishing in factual and concrete detail the extent of the political repression in the United States, which has already claimed dozens of lives and imprisoned thousands of people. Angela Y. Davis, Bettina Aptheker, June 1971.
An Open Letter to My Sister, Angela Y. Davis, by James Baldwin. Dear Sister, one might have hoped that, by this hour, the very sight of chains on black flesh, or the very sight of chains, would be so intolerable a sight for the American people, and so unbearable a memory, that they would themselves spontaneously rise up and strike off the manacles. But no, they appear to glory in their chains. Now more than ever, they appear to measure their safety in chains and corpses. And so, Newsweek, civilized defender of the indefensible, attempts to drown you in a sea of crocodile tears. It remained to be seen what sort of personal liberation she had achieved, and puts you on its cover, chained. You look exceedingly alone, alone, say, as the Jewish housewife in the boxcar headed for Dachau, or as any one of our ancestors, chained together in the name of Jesus, headed for a Christian land. Well, since we live in an age in which silence is not only criminal but suicidal, I have been making as much noise as I can, here in Europe, on radio and television. In fact, have just returned from a land, Germany, which was made notorious by silent majority not so very long ago. I was asked to speak on the case of Miss Angela Davis, and did so. Very probably an exercise in futility, but one must let no opportunity slide. I am something like 20 years older than you, of that generation, therefore, of which George Jackson ventures that there are no healthy brothers, none at all. I am in no way equipped to dispute the speculation, not, anyway, without descending into what at the moment would be irrelevant subtleties, for I know too well what he means. My own state of health is certainly precarious enough. In considering you, and Huey and George, and especially Jonathan Jackson, I began to apprehend what you may have had in mind when you spoke of the uses to which we could put the experience of the slave. What has happened, it seems to me, and to put it far too simply, is that a whole new generation of people have assessed and absorbed their history, and, in that tremendous action, have freed themselves of it, and will never be victims again. This may seem an odd, indefensibly impertinent, and insensitive thing to say to a sister in prison, battling for her life, for all our lives. Yet I dare to say it, for I think that you will perhaps not misunderstand me, and I do not say it, after all, from the position of a spectator. I am trying to suggest that you, for example, do not appear to be your father's daughter in the same way that I am my father's son. At bottom, my father's expectations and mine were the same. The expectations of his generation and mine were the same. And neither the immense difference in our ages, nor the move from the south to the north could alter these expectations or make our lives more viable. For, in fact, to use the brutal parlance of that hour, the interior language of that despair, he was just a nigger laborer preacher. And so was I. I jumped the track, but that's of no more importance here, in itself, than the fact that some poor Spaniards become rich bullfighters, or that some poor black boys become rich boxers, for example. That's rarely, if ever, afforded the people more than a great emotional catharsis, though I don't mean to be condescending about that either. But when Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali and refused to put on that uniform and sacrificed all that money, a very different impact was made on the people, and a very different kind of instruction had begun. The American triumph, in which the American tragedy has always been implicit, was to make black people despise themselves. When I was little, I despised myself. I did not know any better. And this meant, albeit unconsciously or against my will, or in great pain, that I also despised my father, and my mother, and my brothers, and my sisters. Black people were killing each other every Saturday night out on Lenox Avenue when I was growing up, and no one explained to them or to me that it was intended that they should, that they were penned where they were, like animals, in order that they should consider themselves no better than animals. Everything supported this sense of reality. Nothing denied it. And so one was ready, when it came time to go to work, to be treated as a slave. So one was ready, when human terrors came, to bow before a white God and beg Jesus for salvation. This same white God, who was unable to raise a finger to do so little as to help you pay your rent, unable to be awakened in time to help you save your child. There is always, of course, more to any picture than can speedily be perceived, and in all of this, groaning and moaning, watching, calculating, clowning, surviving, and outwitting, some tremendous strength was nevertheless being forged, which is part of our legacy today. But that particular aspect of our journey now begins to be behind us. The secret is out. We are men. But the blunt, open articulation of this secret has frightened the nation to death. I wish I could say, to life, but that is much to demand of a disparate collection of displaced people, still cowering in their wagon trains and singing Onward Christian Soldiers. The nation, if America is a nation, is not in the least prepared for this day. It is a day which the Americans never expected or desired to see, however piously they may declare their belief in progress and democracy. Those words, now, on American lips, have become a kind of universal obscenity, for this most unhappy people, strong believers in arithmetic, never expected to be confronted with the algebra of their history. One way of gauging a nation's health, or of discerning what it really considers to be its interests, or to what extent it can be considered as a nation, as distinguished from a coalition of special interests, is to examine those people it elects to represent or protect it. One glance at the American leaders, or figureheads, conveys that America is on the edge of absolute chaos. It also suggests the future to which American interests, if not the bulk of the American people, appear willing to consign the blacks. Indeed, one look at our past conveys that. It is clear that for the bulk of our nominal countrymen, we are all expendable, and Messrs. Nixon, Agnew, Mitchell, and Hoover, to say nothing, of course, of the Kings Row basket case, the winning Ronnie Reagan, will not hesitate for an instant to carry out what they insist is the will of the people. But what in America is the will of the people? And who, for the above named, are the people? The people, whoever they may be, know as much about the forces which have placed the above-named gentlemen in power as they do about the forces responsible for the slaughter in Vietnam. The will of the people in America has always been at the mercy of an ignorance not merely phenomenal, but sacred, and sacredly cultivated. the better to be used by a carnivorous economy which democratically slaughters and victimizes whites and blacks alike. But most white Americans do not dare admit this, though they suspect it.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?